Go ahead and call our September 10th meeting to order. Just so everybody knows, we're not here to talk about annexation. Fairhope doesn't have the legal ability to forcibly annex anybody, and I know we've heard a lot of concerns about annexation. That's not what this meeting is about. This meeting is going to be a working meeting dealing with the proposed ordinance only. We're going to talk about, we're not going to talk about the past annexation. We're not talking about notices or the process. We're simply going to talk about the ordinance. The purpose that we have of this ordinance is to try to not have Greeno Road end up looking like Airport Boulevard. In the 20 years I've been on this commission, there have been two things through all of the different comprehensive plans, all the different town meetings, all the different groups that we've gotten together with. Everybody says, you know, what do we need to do the most for Fairhope? Number one is always unanimously protect the central business district, because that's what makes Fairhope Fairhope. And number two is don't have Greeno Road end up looking like Airport Boulevard, because we don't want Airport Boulevard in Fairhope. That's not what Fairhope is about. And we have certainly tried to do that through the past. We've passed a lot of ordinances dealing with green space, landscape, metal buildings, construction, sidewalks, setback signs, all of those. You know, we've passed different ordinances in the times that I have been here trying to make Fairhope be something special, and I think we've accomplished a lot in that. You know, one thing that we really have to do is we have to make sure that we're not putting an undue burden on people. Looking at the movie, my wife's favorite movie, It's a Wonderful Life, we have to remember the people that are living, breathing, and dying here, paying the taxes and paying the bills, and make sure that people have that ability. We have to worry about property values. So far, in the time that we have made these different ordinances, a lot of times we've heard, oh my gosh, you know, if we do this, it's going to be hard for everybody to make a living. It's going to hurt our property values. But so far, it seems like Fairhope property values have surged and done pretty well. The format of this meeting tonight, we've got about 12 questions. First of all, we're going to have a presentation on the ordinance. I hope everybody has read it already. We've got 12 questions that have come in that we're going to go over to start with, that are going to deal with the ordinance, that will hopefully clear a lot up. After we go over those 12 questions and any of the commissioners have any questions, we are then going to have a microphone, and we're going to go through the audience. And if you have any question that you have, or if you have a concern or a suggested change, we will bring the microphone to you. We're not going to have any one person have the microphone for 15 or 30 minutes. The moderator will hold it, and you can ask whatever question or make a comment that you want dealing with the ordinance, not the process or the signage about the notice that you got or anything. Obviously, everybody's here. We've done everything we can. We've talked about this at numerous meetings. We've put signs up. We've talked about this at city council meetings. So now we're at the point to not talk about the process, but we're just here to talk about the ordinance. Our commission up here does not have any authority whatsoever to pass an ordinance. We simply make a recommendation to the city council. So what we're going to try to do is put together an ordinance that best prevents Greeno Road from growing into an Airport Boulevard, but still hopefully balances so that the people who live and breathe and die here can make a living and not worry about their property values going south. We're going to try to balance that with the ordinance as best we can. At the end of the day, whatever ordinance we come up with, we'll propose to the city council, and it'll either live or die at that point with the city council. They can either take it as we present it, or they can make changes, or they can just flat out deny it. That will be their decision. We have wrestled with this a long time. We have, in the past, we have brought some ordinances together that have just sort of disappeared, but it's something that Fairhope people, through 3 mayors and numerous comprehensive plans, have always agreed that we need to do whatever we can to protect the growth of Greeno Road. But don't worry, don't think that we, don't balance that with the private rights of people. And if you look at this ordinance, I've heard people say, is there going to be a 400-foot setback? No, there's not. People are concerned about annexation out of the city limits. If you're out of the city limits, this has nothing to do with this. In a lot of places, we're actually shortening setbacks where people will have more buildable space. But I'll let the staff get into that. But one of the big reasons that we're doing this is so far we haven't rezoned a lot of land on Greeno Road commercial because we've been concerned about it, even though people don't feel like it's fair to have residential land on Greeno Road that's not residentially oriented. So far, most of the land we've rezoned, we've done with PUDs, and anybody who's got more than 3 acres can always propose a PUD on Greeno Road regardless of the overlay district. But this is something that we're looking at doing so that people who have single-family residential zonings, R1, R2, or R3, we can actually then look at possibly rezoning their land commercial and know that there's some protections there so that we will not create an airport boulevard type of situation. So with that said, I appreciate your patience listening to me. And Buford, are you going to make the presentation at this point?
And Chairman, thank you. Actually, I think the commission has heard me talk about this enough. I'm delighted to welcome to the podium Hunter Simmons, who is our planning and zoning manager. And I think the benefit here is having another staff member who with exceptional expertise and another set of eyes looking at the ordinance, which Hunter has helped us tremendously about this. So he is going to present tonight, and then I'll support him as we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. As you'll see, I think when we present the questions that we received, we did not resubmit an amended zoning code for you tonight. This is an open meeting with the intent as guided by this commission, and that's the way we want to proceed. So before we get into those questions, I want to share just a little amendment to the website that we've created. If anyone goes to our website, the planning department, under our publications and forms, we've created a new section of ongoing projects, which currently Greeno Road is the only one there. We will amend this as needed. As soon as there's a new document, we will we will put the questions we discussed tonight on there as soon as possible. So this will be the repository moving in the future. The map study that's at the top of that page, I've got it preloaded, so I'm just going to click over here and kind of jump right in. What we want to do here is actually clarify what properties and give us some kind of uniform understanding of what we're going to discuss in the questions. So what we're going to look at here is what properties are actually impacted by this overlay district. Where there are 5 districts proposed, so starting with the Northern Edge District, there are 87 properties that were encapsulated by this boundary. Of those, only 14 are in the city of Fairhope. The rest of those are not applicable under this overlay district. Then we've also further excluded properties that are single-family residential. Once you pull those away, 9 properties are left. Those in this district all happen to be PUDs. We kind of take a different approach to PUDs because as the commission knows, but to explain this a little more clearly, those have their own regulatory process. They have to come through site plan review. They come through planning commission and council. So what we're looking at with this overlay district is actually allowing things by right where they don't have to come with application fees, review processes, and time it takes to work itself through a commission and a council review. So in that sense, we're kind of separating PUDs out of this, although they will be guided, can be guided, but they have a right to make their own exclusions through their process. So moving down to the next district, out of 93 parcels, 65 are in Fairhope. Once you take out the single family, there are 36, and only 9 of those are non-PUDs. So there's, in effect, 9 properties so far in the first 2 districts that are affected by this overlay district. In this sense, since we do have some others, we're going to look at briefly this methodology for looking at where current setbacks are versus, and you'll see this kind of quoted setbacks. They're actually build-to lines in the new language, but in essence, it's the same thing. So there are two different property type or zoning types within this district, B2 and B4. Their currently setbacks are 20 feet in both of those. And you'll see a line pop up here that's black, and it should just cover right over the yellow. They're actually 17 foot. So property owners in these two zones, it's not much, but it's 3 more feet of buildable area. So we're not making a condition worse on the property owner. Keep moving south into the Gateway District. There are 84 properties, and all 84 of those are in Fairhope. Of those, we've removed the single-family residential, and we're left with 22. 7 of those are non-PUDs. 16 to this point in those 3 districts are actually properties affected by this overlay district. Looking at setbacks, we've got, pan out here, this one's zoomed in a little much. We've got B1 and B2 are existing uses, or I'm sorry, existing zoning. Both of those also have 20-foot setbacks. And when we look at the new ones, they are exactly the same thing. Now, we'll clarify what happens in some of the language in this overlay district when we get into questions and what happens in that setback and you build 2 lines. But for now, they're the same dimensions. Moving into the Fairhope Avenue Village District, 41 parcels, 38 are in Fairhope. And we have more affected properties here, 22. 22 of those are non-PUD. So all of those are, and we can look at the building type in the next slide, B2 and B4. 20-foot setbacks. When you look, and there is an amended, we'll discuss this a little later, but I will mention it here. In the initial proposal, this was not the Gateway District was the 20, so we'll get to that. So 17-foot setbacks here, more buildable room for the property owners. Jumping right to the next one, the Southern Edge District, 217 properties in this one. You can see we panned out. 124 are in Fairhope. And I do want to mention here, since this is online, this is not just a slide, this is interactive. So if anyone wants to go in and look and see where their properties are, this is a tool online for them to do it. But jumping over to the affected properties, there's 85, 67 are non-PUDs. Setbacks, similar to the North Village District, but we do have quite a few more. You have, for the most part, things are staying the same, but I will call your attention to a couple. There's, in no case are they getting worse. In some cases, they're getting 40 feet more to build in. In some cases, let's see, this is the only RA zoning in this whole corridor, and they're getting quite a bit of difference in their buildable area. So I hope that clarifies a few questions before we get into the comments. But we did receive some comments both from the commission and some property owners and some just concerned citizens. So I'm going to jump in those and go through. We'll kind of give a little background and then maybe a suggestion if staff has one. And then I think at the end we can open that up for comments. And we are happy with any direction given how we can bring an amended zoning code to you October 7th, if that's what you choose, or if we need to wait and do it the next month, we can do that. So the first comment we got was change the name of the Gateway District. The Gateway is historically thought of in Section Street as you come in from the north into downtown. So this is just about a name, not an objection about the district. So one idea we've got, this is, I can kind of show you in where this falls geographically is kind of in the center of this corridor. So, and you'll see where this kind of gets mentioned a few more times, but we did think a potential name could be the Greeno Business District. We're open to any suggestions there, and that we can have a contest as far as we're concerned. Whatever we need to do there, that should be a simple process. A second question we got was the 8,000 square foot limit for businesses is too small. So I'm going to step away from this question for a second and show you a problem that I'm seeing with our zoning code right now. There's some vagueness there that is tough to interpret as staff. And I gave a little analogy today, and somebody said, that really worked well. If anyone's ever purchased anything from IKEA, they come with instructions that have no words. They're pictures. It keeps it simple, but it's almost too simple. How do you put this thing together? And that's an analogy for our zoning code. You keep it too simple and you don't know what to do. So interpretations that are innocent enough, but are maybe one person chooses this interpretation, another chooses this one. So you have different results for the same code. And this is just one of those examples. In limitations in our current code that, as from what we can tell, has been there since in 2001, there is a limit on buildings, any freestanding or single-use building of 8,000 square feet. There is also mention of a Greeno Road Village Center, and there is you can build up to 18,000 square feet. Nowhere else in our zoning code is the Greeno Road Village Center mentioned. And there is a mention of it in the comprehensive plan, but when you go to that, it's soft description of what that is. It has a vision, but there's no geographic boundary. There's no way to apply that. Where exactly is this center that we can now build 18,000 square feet? So that's one thing we're trying to accomplish with this overlay is where do we apply the rules and the vision that was created in this comprehensive plan? The only other component of the comprehensive plan that might mention this is the map, which, forget trying to read this, I can't remember, I'm gonna have to memorize this. This little asterisk says village. It just happens to be at the intersection of Fairhope and Greeno. So you might kind of say that applies, but what's the boundary? You know, there's an asterisk there, it's kind of vague, and we can't figure that out. So looking at a few things within possible solutions here, anything in the city that has more than 2 occupancies, 2 units at this moment, goes through a MOP review. So we're not as concerned about those. 8,000 square feet seems like a pretty appropriate process, because multiple units, if you've got, you know, condos, whatever, however you want to define a unit, 8,000 square feet per can be a pretty big building.
Hunter, excuse me, would you tell them what MOP is so everybody understands?
That is a multiple occupancy. What's the P?
So MOP, multiple occupancy project.
That's it.
An MOP is a unique feature to Fairhope's regulations in that it's actually included in the subdivision regulations and uses portions of the subdivision regulations for technical review purposes. So within Fairhope's planning jurisdiction, if any development of 3 units or greater on a single piece of property is proposed, it goes through the MOP process that comes before this planning commission for approval.
Thank you, Buford. There is also any properties, as our chairman mentioned, over 3 acres can apply for PUDs. That is a common zoning request here and around the country now. So under that PUD, building sizes can be negotiated. Again, 8,000 is appropriate for those properties.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Would you explain to them what PUD is?
That is a little more nebulous. A PUD is a planned unit development, and the way I like to describe that, it is a negotiation between the city and a developer, and it pretty much allows the ultimate flexibility from a zoning code.
Very good.
There can be any requirements negotiated during that phase, allowances of use, exemptions, waivers, all of those things can be negotiated. And thank you. And looking at the comprehensive plan, there's a distinct desire to create an edge. So when you come into the city through Greeno from the north and south edge districts, there's a desire to have a clear beginning and the end. So we feel that limit in those districts of 8,000 square feet are appropriate. Just a note for us and anyone's reviewing this, we really need to define in our current zoning code freestanding building. And there's one little nuance that is not addressed. We cover anything 3 units or bigger. We cover freestanding single tenant, but 2 is not covered. 2-unit commercial is just kind of not covered. So we're going to need to clarify that, what that definition is. So as we mentioned, current zoning allows 18,000 square feet within the Fairhope Avenue Village Center, but it doesn't define what that is. So what we're suggesting is the Fairhope Avenue Village District in the overlay become that geographic boundary. It tends to agree with the buildings that are already in place. They're larger buildings. It creates kind of that center, and that's what we're suggesting. In any of those cases, and these are all based on feedback we've spoken with people, we do want to allow a 5% overrun of any of those that can be approved with staff recommendation. So that can get into things like porticoches or, some new, just small nuances and some flexibility there. So in either case, we would like to add that if it's okay with commission and council. Moving to number 3, where prohibited in the overlay, can a special case be made for drive-throughs? There is, looking back in a short time and looking at the history of how the comprehensive plan, the original overlay, the village, or the visual preference study, there was a overwhelming desire to limit drive-throughs. That was, that's how they made it into this ordinance or the proposed ordinance, and we don't feel that that's really right to pull it in. It was overwhelming. What we can do is look at mechanisms to make that a little easier, because we did look at some projects where that made sense, because really what we're looking at on a drive-through is, does it impede traffic? Is it a visual eyesore? There's a few things that, at least a few pieces of property that they can handle a drive-through back of house. They're large enough and have access to secondary roads that would not create traffic problems. So in those cases, one suggestion we can make is to make those a conditional use. This is where we're gonna need some help vetting the legality of this. It is okay to use a conditional use, and a suggestion we're making in a development when it's being in its infancy. Some decisions like this can make it or break it, and you can lose those conversations. So in an opportunity to expedite this, because this is not necessarily a hardship, this conditional use could go for approval straight to council. They meet twice as frequently as Board of Adjustments, and just can make those decisions happen quicker. What we recommend is a strict guidelines and to remove any bias, a tool that's used all over the country, is if we can agree on what those conditions are and they meet it, then the language should read, council shall approve this. And that removes any bias that there may be a fear of, but we can kind of discuss that. I have personally never seen this used in strictly an overlay district. The underlying zoning might need to be amended to allow that. So we'll have to dig into this a little deeper as to the legality. Moving to question 4, some properties within the Greeno Road corridor 400-foot boundary don't touch Greeno Road. Are they still held to the standards? So as Buford's described before, this 400-foot was chosen to create an area of influence. Now, what we've looked at through, and reviewing some properties with people, there are certainly some properties, even after we exclude people out of the city and single-family residential, there are still some that it just doesn't make sense to make this apply. For instance, there's quite a few residential units that do not abut Greeno Road as part of a PUD. They're in essence single-family residential, but they don't have the zoning for that, so it's hard to just make an exclusion. However, there are some properties that are non-adjacent that have an impact on Greeno Road. For instance, this property accesses Greeno, but if you look at what the definition of that property is and ownership, they are not adjacent to Greeno Road. So our first thought was we could put language in, anything adjacent, not adjacent to Greeno Road is excluded. That gets some in, some out, but so we're going to need to look at how we clean that process up. We could put a qualifier in, properties not adjacent to Greeno Road and whose location, access, and visual impact do not affect Greeno Road are excluded. That's just one suggestion. We can vet that and look at any other options we have. 5, R3 PGH zoning is a single-family residential, but not exempt from the standards. This is a garden home zoning that is no longer used. You can't apply to receive this zoning. So it kind of slipped through the cracks when we made the exclusions. Most of those are PUD now, but there are a few encapsulated by this, so we've just added it to the list of exclusions. That was an easy one. 6, are the buffer sidewalks requirement in the overlay, is the way that should read, in addition to the setbacks required by the current zoning and landscape buffers required by the landscape ordinance. So the landscape ordinance requires a 20-foot buffer. The buffer and sidewalk required by the landscape ordinance, in essence, happen in the same space. There is a chart here that kind of shows those differences. So 20 foot's required right now and has since the landscape ordinance has been adopted, or at least amended, and I'm not sure on the date on that. We can get that if needed. But this looks at each of the 5 districts, and as you can see, 20-foot Northern Edge District, 17 North Village. We actually originally proposed the Gateway District to have a 20-foot landscape buffer and 5-foot sidewalk. Based on feedback, we've reduced that to not be more of an imposition than there currently is. 20-foot, 17 in the Fairhope Avenue Village District, and 20 again in the Southern Edge District. We feel that this is appropriate and equitable, and we've amended based on feedback. So if there's anything else we need to do to review, we'll be happy to. There is a build-to line. This question 7 asks, do property owners have to place all buildings directly on the build-to lines? Wouldn't that result in simple, big, ugly boxes? So the way the proposed zoning amendment list shows a diagram and shows where that building line is. So it's, in essence, you have your landscape buffer required by the overlay, you have a sidewalk required by the overlay, and then that begins your build-to line, which we can think of as the same thing as a front setback right now. And it says you should build to that. We've got a couple options here, and I think it's fundamental to the way the future of our zoning code reads. As I described, sometimes too simple is a lot more difficult to be flexible on and to it's harder to make an interpretation of. So one option, the simplest way, we can just make a simple edit here that would give some flexibility. So we can offer a 5-foot tolerance from the build-to line. That means somebody can, architectural details, things like the entrances, corners of buildings, the small details can be handled. And that's simple to put in language. Now, there is another alternative that is used, that gives the ultimate flexibility to both property owners and gives us an easier way to read, but it's kind of scary. There's a lot of words, there's the pictures, things like that. So, but this is what in essence is form-based zones, the form-based zoning code. And it's a chart, it's got a lot of words, we can, and this is just one example, we're not proposing this language. I want to be very clear, this is just a screenshot from the internet. We're not proposing this language. It's just to show there is some ranges, instead of definitives, there's ranges here. And there's a lot of variables. Architects, engineers can play with these numbers to fit how a building sits on site. So instead of build 2 lines 5 foot, well, it's within 5 foot is the language. Instead of it's 5 foot, you pretty much have to be within 5 foot the whole front of your building. Well, this says the street wall is 90 to 100%. So it creates a lot of flexibility. We can do this for various building types. And I think one thing we've debated in staff is how do we proceed? So some guidance on which way to go here. I think it's a crossroad. Which way to go and what you want to see would be helpful. And we're willing to do either one. 8 was a question about lighting. And where commercial and residential, is there any restrictions and can it be limited? Now, Beaufort has a very wonderful from Fort Walton County lighting code. I didn't copy all that in there. There's a lot of restrictions on where commercial and residential. I just pulled the first one. The very first standard addresses this. Maximum light level shall be 10 maintained foot candle at any property line in a residential use area. Now, foot candles for lighting is a standard, but kind of hard to visualize. So we just found a chart online that was recommended in your house. So living room, you think at the low end, 10-foot candles are recommended. That's what the property line will be. So yes, this overlay addresses lighting and protections if there happens to be properties, residential properties abutting commercial. And Beaufort will be happy to answer any more lighting questions. No, I would not challenge.
There is not a compatibility analysis function of that, Mr. Chairman, just to reassure you.
That's right. Number 9, buffers where right-of-ways separate residences. We had there are some, this is maybe not a prevalent issue, but there are some issues, and kind of the way our landscape buffer currently reads, uses the word adjoining. So if a property is adjoining residential, there are buffers required. The question was, what happens if there is a secondary street, and there's a few of these instances that butts commercial. So there are some other guidelines, and we just make that, we add adjacent and or adjoining. That's what the change we make, and we probably make that in the necessary location in the landscape ordinance. 10, any discrepancies with this, just to back up a second, I know this is overlay district is a scary concept, but this is not our first. We have the central business overlay district, and we have the medical overlay district, and we have the airport authority overlay district. Did I get those names right? Okay. There is, in some sections, I believe between Morphy and Nichols, am I right there geographically? There is the medical overlay district that overlaps the Greeno, proposed Greeno overlay districts. Once we figure out what the language is, we're going to need to vet that in staff, make sure there's no discrepancies. It's really hard to do until we kind of start putting some pen to paper and getting something we're all comfortable with. 9 are outdoor sales. garden centers prohibited by the overlay districts. They are not addressed in this overlay district. The underlying zoning code, and we've taken a snippet here, so if you look at our use table in the zoning code, our different zoning types are here, and then there's a much greater list of uses in the table. And this is kind of hard to see, but basically the solid black dot, it means it is permitted by right. You don't have to get anything but a building permit if you're building. The hollow circle means it is permitted, but you have to get its own appeal. It's right now Board of Adjustments, I think in all cases at the moment. And then that's really the only option with these three. So there are some restrictions on that. I think it's important to also mention at this point that any use that is right now, this overlay district does not go take those rights away. Those are nonconformities that have the right to keep operating on that bit as they are now. And I think we've discussed this, and even if there's a transfer, as long as the use stays the same, they have the right to do that. So if there's a sale, it's not once it changes hands, as long as the use doesn't change by more than 50%, they have the right to keep doing what they're doing today. So that's just a point of clarification that this ordinance doesn't really address, but that's an important distinction. 12, only prohibited uses are shown. And this kind of came about, I think, with, there's a lot of benefits to this, and we haven't talked about the raising of property value is a big one. But that's a hard one to get. It's not on paper. It's not a promise. So are there any allowances in the overlay? And we talked about setbacks, a little more buildable area. But there's an opportunity to do other things. Currently in the zoning code, plant nurseries and rural markets are only allowable in RA district. There's none within this corridor, no place that would allow those uses. We have some nonconformities, but no new ones could come up by our current code. So we could add those uses. That's a big part of Fairhope's history, and I think an important aspect of the community. It's not something we should turn our back on just because we want buildings at the front, at the front property line. So we could allow that use. We can allow other uses. We can go through the use table and think of 100 others of things we would like to allow, and it could be in one district or all of the districts. So that's just a food for thought for a conversation if we need to get to that level of detail. And Chairman, I know you said don't talk about annex, but I want to mention this one time because that has really come up a lot. And to clarify, for myself and staff as much as anyone, we would like to ask Ken by the next meeting to look at what are the mechanisms a city can annex property, and in specifically what ways they can force annex property. We took a little snippet of, because I think there's a 25,000 number that kind of gets tossed around. Once we get that, we're taking some property. This is a section of code, and this is really tiny. But that section right there, this is in the Alabama state law. I have to even look at this. Annexation of territory by cities of 25,000 inhabitants or more. There's a laundry list of requirements, and this isn't even all of them. This is just a quick snippet of announcements, of council decisions, of rules and regulations, how this is governed. So, but to be clear on what those mechanisms are, so we're all on the same page. We have, would like to ask our city attorney to in the future provide us those mechanisms and what that is, so we're all clear and on the same page on that. But that is the end of our questions, so we'll be happy to entertain.
So this won't get rid of old time feed then?
No, sir. No, sir.
Not at all.
I said this won't get rid of old time feed then, darn. All right. Buford, do you have anything to add, or anyone else this time?
Just thank Hunter for his assistance, and he's come He's provided a great deal of assistance in a very short period of time. And to state it possibly a different way as terms of annexation is that I think maybe it's how you say things, is that a city really cannot, and I'm talking in general here, really cannot forcibly annex. A city of 25,000 residents or greater can initiate a referendum, but cannot just simply forcibly annex. And that's why we decided to ask Mr. Watson, and for those who've never met Ken, he represents the Planning Commission and assists staff with Planning Commission types of issues, but that's why we'd like for him to research for us and make us a list that he's had a chance to vet and that we can illuminate at a future Planning Commission meeting about how annexations go. So, Chairman, I again appreciate Hunter's assistance in putting this together, and then we'll turn it back over to the chairman and the commission to conduct questions and answers.
Yeah, we have had 3 city planners all look at this and put input on this, so we've got a lot of professional help on this, and I appreciate that very much. So I guess, are you ready with the microphone at this time? Again, any questions?
Wait.
Yes, sir.
We want either Hunter or Buford. Would you once again, for the benefit of the crowd of folks that have come here tonight, talk again about the underlying zoning for properties that are actually within the city limits, not those that are outside the city limits, but those that are within, and what, as briefly as you can, what effect the overlay district has on that underlying zoning?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I hear that asked a lot. Personally, I think it doesn't affect it at all. All it basically is, correct me if I'm wrong, is more of an attempt of aesthetics for that district than it is to affect any form or fashion of the underlying zoning, what already is zoned on that given piece of property. It does not preclude a landowner from asking for a change in zoning. It just, in all residential properties, correct me if I'm wrong, all residential properties are excluded from the requirements of the overlay district. Now that I've said that, would you please say that?
Yeah, ditto. The underlying zoning is not changing. What an overlay district does, and it's typically, and you look at our others, it looks at a comprehensive community asset. The medical district, the central business district, the airport, and basically lassos those important impacting properties on that community asset. And then it places, and to be there are some restrictions, there are some allowances. Both of those things have to work to reach a goal that's beneficial to all of us. The underlying zoning and the overlay district is part of our zoning code. As such, this is language, but just like anything in the zoning code, you can ask for a variance. So I think it's important to, it gives us as a city a review process for certain things that we know can be problematic if left to spiral out of control. And to speak bluntly, I think it also gives a comfort level. Currently, if someone rezones from residential property to a business use, what's our most agreed, B1 might be one of our most flexible.
B2.
Okay.
B2.
B2. There is a laundry list of uses in B2 that if this commission and or the council doesn't want, has not too many options, but to deny the case. And it stays residential for a long time. What this does is puts an overlay around those properties and gives a comfort level that things like drive-throughs, things that the community has said we want to limit, then there's a review process for if it's ever allowed. It's not permitted by right. So it gives a comfort level where this commission and or council can make that zoning change to a business use and not worry about the things that the community doesn't want. I hope that was sufficient.
Okay.
All right, I did say I would let commissioners ask questions. I think that since we've got the meeting in October and we're down to about 50 minutes, let's go ahead and hear the audience's concerns and questions, answer their questions, and listen to whatever tweaks they might have. Simply raise your hand, she'll come around, and staff will answer. Hunter, do you want to come up to the?
It's okay.
Okay, if you got the microphone right there, that'll be just fine.
And we can.
Hunter, if you stand up there, they won't throw anything at you, I promise.
I don't believe it yet. I'll wait for this man.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Richard Thompson. My wife and I were just outside to the south of the affected area. And I strongly support this because what it's going to do is going to devaluate my property to the north of me, those who are under the overlay, and will effectively increase our values. Our property will become more valuable when this overlay is placed on the northern neighbor. So we really support this. It's not the worst ordinance I've ever seen. It's the second worst. The worst I've ever seen was comprehensive, 2025? Yeah, that was worse than this, if you can imagine. So please adopt it because it'll make my property values go up and yours will go down. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, now, let's move on.
No, he wants to move on. Let's move on.
Yeah. Anybody else?
We need to restate it. Is there further questions?
Yes. Again, questions or changes, please.
Name's Timothy McEwen. On the businesses as like an automotive repair shop, it's not allowed in certain areas. Per se, if the building is burned down or destroyed by a hurricane or storm, are you able to rebuild that business on that lot or not?
The use transfers.
Yeah.
In a certain time frame?
Yes, and so without going on ad nauseum in this setting for the sake of time, the zoning ordinance does contemplate the ability to reconstruct a structure that is destroyed by fire or by natural disaster. There's a time frame for it, but there is a provision for that. And that is in the existing zoning ordinance right now.
As in the use transfers.
Yes, very similar. Yes.
All right, anybody else? Yes, sir.
Wait, it's
Let's get the
Hold on just a
microphone
second.
for us deaf folks.
Kip Dye. So if your property is unzoned and you have the overlay, how's that going to affect the unzoned? Well, I mean, it'll create new problems for the unzoned property because it'll have to follow new rules. Also, our property is at the southern border. There is no sidewalk in front of it. There's a culvert in front of it. I'm not sure how that's going to affect it. 10 feet from the culvert puts it back into our property.
Well, once again, if you're unzoned, it will not affect your property at all.
And I think it'd be really helpful if everyone could phrase, there's so many people who've given up their valuable time to be here. If you can phrase it as a question,
Yeah.
then it gives the chance, for somebody to provide an answer, and maybe other people want an answer to that same question.
Right, but to answer your question, if you're unzoned, this does not affect you at all. If you chose to be zoned and to come in to the city, it would affect you, but if you chose not to come into the city, this would not affect you at all.
If you're unzoned, if your property is unzoned, you're obviously not in the city limits. Because if you were in the city limits, you would be zoned. So this has no effect either on you being within the corridor, but outside the city limits, there's no effect on you at all. And if you're zoned residential, it also has no effect on you at all.
Chairman, can I clarify?
Well, let me say one thing. It could affect you if you were zoned residential in the sense that if you came to get your property rezoned commercial, we would probably give you a lot more positive listening to than if you did not, than if we did not have this. I mean, I think one of the big reasons for this are those smaller parcels of residential that are less than 3 acres, so that we have a comfort knowing that if we rezone those, we're not hurting the neighbors. Everybody's against zoning until somebody wants to put a pig farm or a cell phone tower or something like that next door to them, nuclear power plant, et cetera, and then everybody wants zoning. So I use some extreme examples, but just saying that one reason for this, if you're zoned residential, hopefully this will give the commission and ultimately the city council a lot more of a comfort level and be willing to rezone your land to commercial.
Look, can I, just one, I've been here 4 weeks, and I still have some confusion about our jurisdictions, and I think that's a confusing thing. Just to clarify, we have a permit jurisdiction, that is different from our planning jurisdiction, that is different from our corporate boundary, and also our police jurisdiction.
Yes.
There is some confusion because we implement a sign ordinance and a landscape ordinance in our police jurisdiction where we have police power. That is not a part of the zoning code. This is all zoning code, and the only place it's applicable is within our municipal boundaries.
Correct. Yes, sir.
So you pretty much are saying that if this overlay district is passed, that it does not affect anybody who's going to go back and build a building on their property, on Cliff Street, by the way, on their piece of property. This overlay district does not affect that as long as they're not within that corporate boundary.
That is absolutely correct. Yes, sir.
So essentially, whenever we go and get a building permit on Highway 98, anywhere south of Fairhope, your overlay district standards that you're setting right now will not have any effect on us into the future.
That is correct.
How long?
As long as you're out of the city limits.
Can you share with the comprehensive plan, what in that comprehensive plan, y'all's plans on widening your city limits in the comprehensive?
If you
let me
guys
say
could,
this.
please give your
Christie Street,
name,
by the way, I'm sorry, Christie
please
Street.
name and
Yeah,
address,
yes, ma'am.
please.
Well, let me say this. The comprehensive plan is a guiding document. It has no teeth. It just gives us an idea that, hey, if somebody wants land to be rezoned, then we can at least look at the comprehensive plan. Now, we may argue differently what the comprehensive plan says, but the comprehensive plan is a guiding principles of kind of how we would like our city to come together. Unfortunately, because in the state of Alabama, comprehensive plans are not legal documents, the comprehensive plan has nothing to do with annexing land or bringing land into the city limits. I mean, that's really another subject for another day, to be honest.
But can you share with us, because I've heard things in your comprehensive plan, even though it's not legal or whatever, what are your ideas of eventually, what are the limits?
Yeah, I don't know what that is in the comprehensive plan, and that's not what we're discussing today. But I tell you, the comprehensive, no, he wouldn't know. He's been here 4 weeks. But let me say, the comprehensive plan is online, and you can read the comprehensive plan. And I don't know, frankly, of anywhere where it discusses, annexation as part of the comprehensive plan. It has, desires that we would have in certain areas. But of course, you get to the area where I grew up, Barnwell, and because it's out of the city limits, it's very problematic. Nobody out there, wants any kind of annexation. But it's interesting to me, I now live out near Fish River, and nobody wanted annexation out there. It was voted down 99.8%. I think we had 5 votes for it, and 2 of them were my wife and mine the last time the referendum came up. But it's amazing when subdivisions come in and everybody complains about the subdivisions and they don't want this, they don't want that. How do we allow these small lots? How do we allow this? Why can a dry cleaner go across the street from me with a steel building with no greenery in front of it? Why do we allow that in Fairhope? And we're like, well, that's out of the city limits. That's how they want it. But anyway, again, nobody wants zoning except for on our neighbors. We don't want it on us. But that's another subject. We're dealing with this ordinance. So what other questions do we have about this ordinance? Cecil?
I've got a statement that leads to a question, Rebecca, so I'll get there in just a minute. I appreciate Buford. We spent over an hour together, and he solved some problems and really did some things that made me feel better about this. It's been said that there's confusion. It's been said from the council and from us. I guarantee you there's confusion about this. I'm getting to my question in a minute. This thing, I've been studying this since for about 5 weeks now, the 44 pages plus. I've looked at every video. I've tried to understand it, comprehend it, which is difficult for me to do. I've gotten wise people to kind of try to explain things to me. The question is going to be, what we're talking about tonight is not what I've been studying for the last 4 weeks. So indeed, there's questions, there's confusion, because Hunter, you do a great job, but you make things that are concerning us greatly seem like, well, it's just really not a problem. You know, there may be a variance. They may be, let's say shall, there may be a variance. I think my question is this. What we're talking about tonight is probably somewhere close, but not what the council will be voting on in a month or so. We're just kind of going through, trying to understand where we are. But once we have a document, which we know will be whatever, that's when we're going to get excited, I think. So does that make sense? I'm confused.
Right, and
And I don't want to be confused, but I appreciate your words, because you said it was not to get rid of old-time feet.
Well, let me say this, Cecil.
We've been there since '87 when that's still 98 truck route. And look, we love this city. This community has embraced us. And, oh, Lord, we're blessed for it. And I'm so thankful for it. I'm nervous about this because what I believe is if we have a fire or, Lord, a weather event, tell me that we would be able to have a rebuilt old-time feed. When I sell to the young men in the back, and I hope that's sooner rather than later, but I'm going to hang around till I'm old, will he be able to continue what we've done for 32 years next month? And I'm not trying to be personal, and I'm not trying for it to be about me, because it's our neighbors, it's our community, because this is a special place, and you know it. Yeah. And the secret's out, because a lot of other people know it, and I love them, because they buy stuff. Right. Y'all got a heck of a job. But, I'm confused.
Hey, but Cecil, what we're doing here is we're trying to get the input of what your concerns are now, so we can tweak this before it gets to city council. Things like, what if my building burns down? What if I sell my building?
We will know the tweaks, right? We will know the final document that will be considered
and those are things
by our city council.
And those are things that we're looking for because, you know, I see you here, I see Fred Watkins back here, and, you know, some of the backbones, Dr. Strickland, who's got, you know, property out on Greeno, you know, some of the backbones, the streets, you know, people have been community members forever, and those are the people, y'all are the people that we're trying not to hurt.
Bless your heart. We're not opposed to zoning because we're well zoned. That's the smallest Waffle House sign in the world. We're not opposed to zoning because we know that's one thing that makes us special. Just.
Mr. Chairman, can I answer that?
Yes, sir.
And we answered this question just a few minutes ago, so I'll just briefly restate that the provisions for the rebuild, fire damage, natural disaster, etc., are already contemplated and already included in the zoning ordinance. There is a provision for rebuild and restoration.
And transfer as well.
Sure, absolutely.
And how about, what if a building is vacant?
180 days.
180 days.
If it goes out of operation, that use can go out of operation. It has 180 days to resume its prior use.
But now, taking the use away, what about the,
But just to clarify, this is current law, that's current zoning.
This is already in the zoning ordinance right now and has been in the zoning ordinance since at least 2001.
But as far as the aesthetic aspects of the overlay district, if a building was vacant for 180 days in that case, they wouldn't have to, rebuild it. They would be able to release it as it was, correct?
If we're talking about it, well, we would have to examine, it's hard to talk about and overgeneralize something when we're talking about a hypothetical scenario where we don't know the details.
Well, it's going to happen. I'm just saying, let's just say building at 101 Greeno Road becomes vacant, somebody puts it for rent, it's vacant for a year and a half. And then someone comes in who is an acceptable use at this point, but the building doesn't meet the overlay setbacks, et cetera. The building doesn't have to be rebuilt. They can still lease the building as is because the building's grandfathered in, correct?
I think that would be the intent.
I think that's definitely the intent, and I think that that's a good point on probably some language, where we need to make certain we've got language that clarifies that.
Yeah.
So, and that's why we had this meeting, to bring up these
Sure.
types of questions.
Because that's something we need to look into because
Absolutely.
we wouldn't want somebody to have to bulldoze a building due to the fact that it had been, vacant at a time of poor economy.
Well, and I think it's also important to look at what's successful here and what is both of these businesses, streets and the old time feed are something the city desires. Perhaps we can just amend this code to allow that use and that style of business.
Mm-hmm.
If that's what that's, I think, the question we should be having instead of getting into the mix, we just make
I
that
think,
allowable.
my biggest thing with this whole issue is I've been hearing for 20 years, we don't want this to look like Greeno Road. But, you don't see a lot of feed stores on Greeno. I'm more interested in, by the way, form-based zoning means by definition, you're concerned about what it looks like. You're not really worried about what's there, you just want it to look good from the street. And on this, I'm more concerned about form-based zoning than whether it's, carpet shop or a feed shop or a garden center or a restaurant. I'm more, concerned about the form-based zoning within reason. Obviously, certain types of businesses are going to be, a lot of asphalt, and that's a concern. For instance, the concern about the drive-throughs is not necessarily a drive-through up by a building, but when you have 5 lanes of a drive-through and big lights, then you look at the building with the parking in front, and all you see is asphalt, and that's what we're trying to get away from. But more questions.
Gary Wolf. I don't understand
We
why.
sure don't want to do business with you, by the way. None of us in here do, I
Y'all
don't
keep
think.
going the direction you are, we're going to do a lot of business. Yeah. I don't understand why we're at this point, because we've already got zoning already. Fairhope's a beautiful town. People are pouring in here. We've got the flyers for zoning. We got the trees. We got the setbacks. Everything's in place. I don't understand what the problem is. If you ride down Greeno Road, tell me a building that's not nice. Tell me a facility that's not nice. I don't understand. Hardee's is going to be nice. It will be when it's rebuilt. But I don't understand why we're having the discussion, having the problems that we're having. And at the end of the day, you're saying none of this is going to affect you. You're right. I hate to use the word grandfathered in, but we're all grandfathered in. It's not going to affect us one bit. But where it is going to affect us is when I get ready to sell my business. And you're saying it's not going to cost me money, I'm going to make more money. Well, that's a pie in the sky, and that what he just said a minute ago, he couldn't answer, because you're exactly right, Lee. That does not read that way. If that building is something happens, or it tears, or I sell that building and it sits there for a year, somebody comes in and does something with it, then they come under this new rule if y'all pass it. That's what everybody doesn't understand. Where it comes in is 10, 15 years from now, when you get ready to sell your mobile home business by my cemetery out there. That's where it's going to come in. That's where it's going to come in. So I don't think, and the other thing I'm hearing, was anybody, I understand there were some people contacted, and most of them was probably downtown. Is anybody, and we've done our own little survey, was anybody contacted or part of this process that owns property on Greeno Road? Was any one person contacted and had any input in this process? And
I would venture to say that we have been requested to contact people. Emily, how many letters did we send out for Greeno Road?
660.
So we contacted
that's not Greeno Road, that's the city of Fairhope. What we're talking about.
No, sir. I'm listening. I'll tell you, not from the microphone, but afterwards. I'll tell you quite a few buildings I think are ugly on Greeno Road that have distracted from the
I'd like
view.
you to tell me in this meeting.
No, I don't
got
want to hurt anybody's feelings. But with that said, we sent 660 letters to people on Greeno Road, affected within 400 feet of Greeno Road. We sent 660 letters to people letting them know what we were looking at doing, asking for input. And as far as, I think, the input you're putting, I think, allowing existing uses to transfer from one owner to another, I think that's something, we can make much ado about nothing, and I think that's something we could add in the ordinance very easily, so that we protect people like you for, issues like that, if that's what the concerns are. I think that would be a very easy fix.
One concern, there's a lot of concerns, and that letter went out after August the 5th. So that's not a lot of time for us to get together and talk and people to know that. So I think there's a lot of things. To me, y'all should stop, slow down, bring some people in from Greeno Road that you're affecting us. You're not affecting a business downtown Fairhope. You're affecting a business on Greeno Road. So I think the people on Greeno Road, I know you're representing everybody in Fairhope, but you're also representing the people on Greeno Road. And as far as I know, we have not had one say-so about it at all.
Again, we're not trying to talk about the process. Any changes you'd like to make, please let us know. No, I'm saying we've been talking about this for 20 years off and on. We've been, back in May, we mentioned this in meetings. We've been to the city council. If people on Greeno Road don't follow the city council, they don't follow the agendas, they don't keep up with what's going on, then I apologize for that. But we've sent out 660 letters. We've put signs out. We're not even looking at this until October. We'd even have longer before it's finished being tweaked. I mean, this thing's months away from going to city council, so we've got plenty of time. So again, let's stay off the process, and any changes that you're concerned about that are constructive, such as allowing existing businesses to be grandfathered from one owner to another, even if there's a vacancy, let's bring those items up, because those are some easy fixes that we can make.
Can we also,
What about the hard fixes too?
All right, I'm bringing them up too.
I'll wait till he's done.
I did.
Okay.
Brought a bunch of them.
Are you finished?
All right, go ahead.
Can address Cecil's question?
Go.
The question is, I just wish y'all would, I don't understand why it's happened like it's happened, and I wish y'all would slow it down and go back to the drawing board, because if y'all, every city council, every mayor has passed this down the road. You're right, Lee.
Yeah,
Everybody's
we've
passed it
gone
down
back to the
road.
drawing board for 20 years
Yeah,
now.
and what I'm
I don't want
saying,
to go back to the
I-
drawing board. We've
I
got
wish-
3 professionals that have been pushing this, and because you got on the board 3 months
Right,
late and didn't
yeah,
watch the city
yeah.
council meeting back in May, you're coming in late. I'm not. But we're doing this to hear all of the input from everybody out there.
Okay, my
So-
last comment will be, this has been going on for 25 years. Every mayor's pushed it down the road, every city council's pushed it down the road. If y'all would have done this 25 years ago before half of those buildings were built out there, it would be okay. The issue now is you're trying to fix something that people have already spent thousands and thousands of dollars, built businesses, bought property, and you're trying to redo the rezoning and trying to redo it. And if you'd have done that, the previous councils would have done it 25 years ago, it'd been great. But I just think you're doing it wrong by trying to change it now.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Address Cecil's question was, if we get all these comments, it gets rewritten, is there a chance, Buford, could y'all address Cecil's question that we're receiving comments, you're going to amend this document. How will the public be able to access it? I wanted to see if staff could address Cecil's question about the document once amended, once the comments that we've received have been incorporated into this ordinance, will it be then made available to the public again, and will people have the opportunity?
So, Chairman and
Clarify that.
Commissioners, every agenda of every Planning Commission meeting is published online. Every word of every document is published online. And it's published where all of the Planning and Zoning section of the City of Fairhope website. So every packet has everything. So every amendment will be placed in that agenda where it can be downloaded and read prior to the meeting.
So before the October, just to be brief, before the October meeting, people can find that online.
Now, Commissioners, let me say this. Let me give a caveat, is that staff has to attend this meeting, try to synthesize what we're hearing tonight, plus go back and watch the videos and review our own notes. I can't guarantee you that we will have everything ready by the October meeting. So I just want to make that very clear as well. So it may be necessary that before we can bring a document for this Planning Commission to act upon, that may actually go into November, because we're not through with this. We're not through with tonight's meeting, and we've had a lot of great questions tonight.
But regardless, the
so
short answer is
that
before
yes.
the meeting that we look at, this thing will be online in its
Correct.
entirety, that anybody who wants to go online can easily access it.
Correct. And Chairman, Commissioners, and for the members of the public, which we appreciate coming tonight, the website that Hunter showed when we began the meeting, I encourage everyone to look at every single document on that section. You can see the current version that was included in the August meeting. It has been extracted as a standalone document to make it easy to download and read. The new text is in red. Any changes or removals are in strike through. And so, but that will certainly be amended as well. But you can review that to gain an understanding of what we're doing. And I just want to make something very, very clear. This is an amendment to the existing zoning ordinance. And I think the great thing about what we're hearing tonight is sections of the ordinance that are not proposed for changes are now receiving some attention from the public And I think the zoning ordinance is being read for the first time in some instances. So I think that's great, because if there are flaws with it, we can evaluate if we need to make changes.
I think that's a very interesting point. Some of these issues that people are upset about tonight are already there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So-
That have been in the zoning ordinance since 2001.
Bring it on back.
Bob Griffin, I'm a lifelong resident of Fairhope. I've got properties in the city, out on Greeno Road, and out in the country on Greeno Road. And look, this, you keep saying this is going to increase our value, and this is more restrictive than a zoning that's been in place for a while, since the 60s with Jim Nix, okay? How bad has Greeno Road grown up since the 60s? I don't think we need anything more restrictive than what we've got. Let's work with what we've got, because the business community here has not been notified. I know what you're saying. We should have been on top of it and everything. The letters that went out you keep talking about, August 5th.
All right.
It was a
Any
little
changes
late.
you think we need to make? We've heard that already from
I
Mr. Wolf.
know you don't want to hear process.
But
I want
let's
that.
move on to people who have changes they want us to make so that the staff can hear them. But we got that we didn't notify everybody. We apologize. Let's move on. Yes, sir, Mr. Tillman. Oh, wait. Let's let Gene go first, then we'll go back. Sorry about that.
I'm Gene Tillman. I've been here 50 years, and because I'm like Gary Wolf, I think Gary said what he said for most of us on Greeno Road. But my question is this: how many of you on that council and these gentlemen sitting up front own property on Greeno Road?
I happen to live in a subdivision that's right adjacent to the business corridor of Greeno Road, so I'm very familiar with the traffic and all that goes on out there. And I haven't heard anybody say anything that is different really than what we're trying to accomplish in terms of making it more attractive, making it more user-friendly, and making it more appealing. And I think when you put those combinations together with property, I think it becomes more valuable, and I think it becomes a more pleasant atmosphere for people to be in. Am I wrong about that?
Yes.
So you want people stopped in traffic?
Well, let's not go back and forth. Let's keep this a working meeting. We're not selling anything right now. We're listening to the public. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mr. Chairman, my name is Dan Blackburn. I've been asked by between 75 and 100 people to be their spokesperson tonight. And I'm going to take just a minute and go over
Mr. Blackburn, as far as spokespersons, we want to keep this to changes and tweaks. This is the political process. You can be a spokesperson when it gets to city council and tell them how many people you lined up who are that you're representing and that you're going to sue them or whatever you want. But right now, we want what you think's wrong with the ordinance and different changes that we can make that'll satisfy you or anyone else. Other than that, we're not. Okay.
I'd like the opportunity to do exactly that.
Let's do it then.
There is one thing that has gotten precious little attention and I think precious little thought into the drafting of this ordinance at this stage, and that's the distinction between a non-conforming use and a non-conforming structure. And I want to take a minute and talk about the impact on the landowner and specifically on property values when a non-conforming use or a non-conforming structure has been brought about by the passage of an ordinance. Let's say hypothetically that the passage of this ordinance prohibits a certain use. So the person who's been in business for some number of years is no longer a conforming use. That may or may not be a problem. He can continue that use. He can sell the business to somebody else who can either continue that use, or maybe the buyer of that business wants to devote the property to another use which is conforming. So in that case, problem solved. But when you're dealing with a non-conforming structure, things are very different. And I counted 56 different provisions in this proposed ordinance that would create either a non-conforming use or a non-conforming structure. And let me just give you one example. There is language in this proposed draft that specifies what the roof pitch should be. Now,
What the what?
roof pitch, all right? The language as it now says is are in a range of 6 to 12 to 12 to 12. Well, now, as opposed to a non-conforming use, if a landowner built that building 10 to 15 years ago at a time when that structure complied chapter and verse with everything to do with Fairhope's regulations, and now the roof pitch is non-conforming, think about the financial effect on the landowner to bring that structure back into conformity. Now, in that situation, if business owner wants to sell that property to a third party, and third party does his due diligence and realizes that that roof has got to be repitched, I can only see two situations there. Actually, one situation. The property value is going to be negatively affected.
Just a moment ago, I asked Buford that exact thing and asked about the provision in there. I just asked specifically if a building is vacant and the building itself is non-conforming, would it be allowed to be released? Is that not correct, Buford?
And Mr. Chairman, we're not talking, I appreciate the discussion here, but we're not talking about the Greeno Road Corridor Overlay District. We're talking about an existing section, an existing provision within the existing zoning ordinance. So if there's a flaw within the existing zoning ordinance, then we can certainly address it. We can certainly address it. And again, I think that's the benefit of this process, is it's illuminating different parts of the zoning ordinance that don't necessarily apply to the endeavor we have tonight. So we appreciate the comments, and we'll certainly evaluate them.
And I'm not going to take up y'all's time tonight going through everything that I've cataloged in this ordinance. I don't think that would be to anybody's benefit, but there are some things of particular concern that I think this commission and staff should pay particular attention to. One is the paragraph dealing with applicability. What triggers the terms of the overlay ordinance to go into effect? Well, that language says this section applies to all construction, demolition, Class 3 renovations, sidewalks, uses, private improvements, and landscape alterations of any kind. It's that last clause that gives me heartburn. Landscape alterations of any kind? You're telling me that if a property owner digs up a camellia bush or plants an azalea bush, we got to come to City Hall and ask Mother, may I? I don't think that's what was intended, but that is exactly what the language suggests. Once that trigger condition occurs, then we've got a mandatory site plan review, and along with the mandatory site plan review is a landscape plan, both of which are mandatory. That is a $5,000 trip to City Hall.
Dan, can I interrupt just a minute? Have you provided all those comments to staff? Have you provided
This is the
those
first time we've heard
comments
this.
for them to review?
I thought that's what I was doing tonight, Art.
No, I'm talking about if you've done it before you came here, that now we're just beginning to hear it. Because we could all be have reviewed that before we got here tonight.
I'm giving this information to all of you for the first time.
Okay. We've got just about 8 more minutes, so some other folks might want to talk, so if you have a list of things written down, if you'd like to give them to staff, would be great. If you've got one or two more things, would be fine, but other people may want to talk here, and we want to let them have an opportunity as well.
Let me just tell you what I would suggest to you that you all do. If your legal counsel tells you that you have the authority to do this, I think y'all need to go back to the drawing board and start completely over. If that's not what your legal counsel says you can do, my request to you all is that you send this to the city council with a negative recommendation and slow down, pump the brakes, engage with all these people in the room who are the stakeholders who are going to be most affected by this ordinance, and draft something that's not as oppressive and onerous as this is. And I'll close by asking for a show of hands of how many people in the room are opposed to this ordinance as it's presently written.
Right.
Thank you for your time.
Right, anybody else have anybody else to speak? Yes, sir.
I'm John Vansack, newcomer to Fairhope. I just have a couple quick questions on, I guess, process. If the changes need to be made from tonight before the next meeting, will the rest of us have a chance to read those changes prior to it going to city council? Or would we have another opportunity to have
Well,
another meeting like this?
It'll come to the Planning and Zoning Commission first, and it will not come, we will not discuss it at the Planning and Zoning Commission until it has been written and advertised. Buford's given us a pretty good hint that it probably won't be written and advertised by the October meeting. So, hopefully the November meeting. So, but yes, you will have a chance to see it in its entirety before that meeting. And I'd like to see a show of hands of everybody in here who's actually read the ordinance from start to finish. Good. Because I like to suggest that everybody read it, because a lot of what's come up in here with non-conforming uses, et cetera, is not even part of the overlay district. It's already part of the zoning that we have. So, anyway, hey, Fred, it's not your turn. You can raise your hand if you want to have a question. Anyway, but yes, it will absolutely be presented prior to any recommendation vote on our part. And then it would go to city council, where they would ultimately vote it forward or vote it down.
So when it's advertised, that'll be the final draft before it goes?
Correct.
So then there will be no other chance like this? So this is kind of...
No, it'll be advertised. It'll then be discussed in the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, at which time changes may occur at that point, and then it'll be advertised prior to the city council meeting, at which point changes could be made then.
So in other words, everybody has a chance to voice again if need be?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to add, any change they'd like us to make? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Valerie Connor. I have a couple of questions, if that's all right.
Sure.
One is the city green space at Edwards and Greeno. Is that going to be affected at all by this? And if so, how? And the houses along there on Edwards, if they go up for sale, how is that going to affect?
Okay. For the green space at Edwards and Greeno.
That's city property.
Okay.
That is city property, and I'm not aware of any future purposes or any city issues on that property at this time.
The houses on Edwards, if they go up for sale, is there going to be some kind of effect from this?
Well, let's assume, and forgive me for not having it readily available, but let's assume that those are all zoned single-family residential. Single-family, as we mentioned several times, single-family residential zoning districts are not included in the corridor. So those properties can carry on as they are in a single-family, as a single-family residence. And Chairman, Commissioners, if you will indulge me just a brief moment, I encourage everyone to look at the story maps that Hunter presented earlier, and something we maybe didn't explain very clearly. The color coding, if a property is color-coded, and it may be yellow for R1, it may be light brown for R2, and so forth. The color coding tells you what its zoning district is. If it's zoned, it's in the city. If the background is a plain white or plain gray background, it's not in the city. So, and that not only in the story maps, but also the city's online map viewer, which I encourage everyone to look at as well, because that's an extremely handy resource.
We've got third row right here in the center. We've got a question. Yes, sir.
Garrett Gover, 300 Lincoln Street in Fairhope. I have a couple of suggestions.
Okay.
When I consider the corridor overlay district, I see the possibility of some implications for the environment. For example, there'll be some effects on buffers and perhaps stormwater drainage systems and so on. I'd like to recommend that some documents be added to the planning department's list of publications so that these materials can be used as references as needed and support the zoning process and the planning and designing and construction of things. Some examples would be the Fly Creek watershed restoration project, the Volanta Gully Watershed Management Plan, and the Weeks Bay Watershed Management Plan. These documents contain some extremely important information about the environment that can be affected. In addition, the city has a complete streets policy, so I have a lengthy list of U.S. government, state of Alabama, and the City of Fairhope documents that I think ought to be added to the publications available for use to support zoning and development matters. And I'll
Thanks.
just hand.
That's good input. And by the way, the complete streets was looked at very carefully with this, and that's one of the reasons that some of the setbacks were actually reduced, sidewalk spaces increased in certain areas to try to, try to implement some of the complete streets goals that they have. We'll have one more question. Yes, ma'am, and then we'll go ahead and close it up.
Danny Blackburn read from the ordinance specifically, Judy Thompson, specifically regarding any change of use and the fact that the change of use would trigger the overlay district coming into play, especially the landscaping and other issues. It seemed that that was a bit of a surprise, so I wondered how many of the planning and zoning was aware of the specifics of the change in use.
I was. Anyway, at this time, I appreciate all of the input. It sounds like most of the concerns that people have are of their individual properties transferring their rights to others, and we understand that. We'll look and see in what areas we can do to help in that, and I appreciate your coming out very much. Thank you.